Under the flickering fluorescence of Seattle, Tacoma International Airport, amid the drone of suitcase wheels and the distant thud of boarding announcements, a hush fell, not the usual kind that follows a flight delay or a missed connection, but a silence heavy with disbelief. A figure recognizable across continents, Meghan Markle, Duchess of Sussex, stood surrounded by airport security, her posture tense, her face unreadable. Moments later, her wrists would be bound in silver handcuffs, the crisp click echoing down the terminal. An arrest. A charge. Not a royal photo op, not a red carpet, but a scandal that no spin doctor could bury. It wasn't just a moment. It was the rupture of an image crafted with precision and protected with ferocity. The world had seen them. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, smiling on magazine covers, releasing emotionally curated documentaries, delivering speeches about resilience and healing. And yet, here they were, brought down by an incident so raw, so human, it felt almost surreal. An alleged domestic violence incident, a physical altercation at the very place millions pass through anonymously every day. But not them. Never them. Not anymore. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. For years, their story had been told in halves, celebrated as freedom seekers or condemned as royal deserters. They had become myths wrapped in modern headlines, walking contradictions to some, revolutionary truth-tellers to others. But this wasn't just another op-ed debate or palace whisper. This was a police report. This was a booking. This was real. The incident, according to early police documentation, began with a verbal spat near one of the airport's private access corridors. It wasn't clear what ignited it, whether it was something small that had built over time or something bigger that had finally burst through the surface. What is clear, at least according to sources close to the investigation, is that Meghan allegedly pushed Prince Harry, referred to in the report as Coleman, for privacy purposes, multiple times. The physical nature of the confrontation was enough for authorities to step in and make an arrest. Meghan was booked at the South Correctional Entity in Des Moines, Washington, just miles away from the glamour of luxury lounges and first-class gates. And still, the world blinked in disbelief. How did we get here? How did two people who once stood on the balcony of Buckingham Palace, one an heir, the other a symbol of change, wind up embroiled in a domestic assault case that has now been filed and stamped into the American legal system? What happens when the fairy tale, so meticulously scripted and globally consumed, shatters in front of airport vending machines and TSA monitors? But this story isn't just about Meghan's arrest. It's about the erosion of a public partnership, the rot beneath a picture-perfect exterior. It's about the weight of unresolved trauma, of fame, of global scrutiny. It's about what happens behind closed doors when there's no palace staff to intervene, no publicist to buffer, no crowd of supporters to drown out the truth. It's about power, not just royal power, but emotional power, the kind that turns love into leverage and vulnerability into a weapon. And perhaps most of all, it's about Harry. Because while the world's cameras focused on Meghan, on her hands being cuffed, on her face as she entered the back of the squad car, there was another face the lenses struggled to catch, Harry's. The prince who once walked behind his mother's coffin with a blank stare and trembling fists. The man who, in recent years, has spoken openly about mental health, about breaking generational trauma, about choosing love over lineage. The same man who, now, stood silently as his wife was taken away. No heroic protests, no melodrama, just silence. And silence says everything. In that silence, a million questions echo. Had there been signs? Had something been building for weeks, months, maybe years? Were there arguments that never made it past the gates of their Montecito mansion? Did anyone close to them see this coming? Some insiders now say yes. Behind the carefully constructed brand of authenticity and empowerment, rumors had long swirled of tension. Staff turnover, pressured contracts, a Netflix deal reportedly on thin ice, a Spotify divorce, rebranding fatigue, and most damning of all, Harry's friends, once visible, now distant, people he grew up with who quietly stepped away. Could it be that those who knew him best saw what was coming before he did? Insiders allege that Harry's circle had voiced concerns, subtly at first, then more directly. Not about Meghan's past or her Hollywood roots, but about the way control seemed to shift. The way Harry, once vibrant and cheeky, grew more withdrawn. The way decisions were made not with family, but with managers. The way everything became performative, strategic. But to the public, their union was the stuff of modern folklore. Two rebels rejecting a system. Lovers braving media storms. A couple daring to rewrite history on their own terms. It sold books, it made headlines, it inspired think pieces and podcasts. They were, in many ways, untouchable. Until now. Because in the eyes of the law, no amount of Instagram followers or Oprah exclusives can erase assault allegations. There are no curated lighting setups in a jail cell. No docuseries spin when you're fingerprinted. And for Meghan Markle, whose life has been a climb from cable television actress to duchess to global icon, this moment is perhaps her most unfiltered yet. Not because of what the public sees, but because of what it says about what they didn't. There's also the matter of timing. This isn't just any moment in the couple's public life cycle. With multiple business deals underperforming and public sentiment shifting, the veneer has been cracking. Even their most loyal fans have begun to question the authenticity of their narrative. And in that climate, this incident landed not like a scandal, but like a collapse. So what do we know? We know that Meghan Markle was arrested on domestic violence charges after allegedly pushing Prince Harry multiple times during a heated altercation at the airport. We know that she was taken into custody and booked at the South Correctional Entity. We know that the police report confirms physical contact sufficient for arrest under Washington state law. But beyond those cold facts lies something deeper. A disintegration. A reckoning. Because this story isn't just about Meghan or Harry or a moment of aggression. It's about the truths we avoid when the spotlight is too bright to see past. It's about the myths we buy into because the alternative is too uncomfortable. And it's about what happens when reality breaks through the glamour and demands to be acknowledged. So now the world watches. Will there be a statement from Harry? Will the palace intervene? Will legal charges be pursued? Or will they be quietly dropped in exchange for silence and retreat? And what does this mean for the couple's future? Not just together, but as individual figures of public consequence. Because no matter what comes next, whether it's an apology, a courtroom appearance, or a complete media blackout, the arrest will linger. Not just in headlines, but in memory. In the millions of people who saw a woman once crowned by the press as a feminist icon, now standing accused of assaulting the very man she once said saved her life. This is not the end of their story, but it is, without question, the end of the illusion. From the outside, it looked like any other high-profile couple quietly moving through a public airport. Low heads, dark glasses, whispers exchanged beneath designer masks. The buzz of a typical weekday crowd at Seattle, Tacoma International Airport barely flinched at first. Passengers were busy with their boarding passes, kids tugged at parents' coats, and the muffled drone of intercom announcements hummed overhead. But something strange was brewing beneath the surface of this routine afternoon. Something invisible to the untrained eye, but heavy enough to thicken the air around them. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle had just stepped off a commercial flight, a choice that raised eyebrows in itself. For a couple once accustomed to royal jets and private aviation, flying commercial was either a cost-saving move or a public relations tactic. But regardless of motive, the couple had just walked out of the first-class cabin looking more like strangers than spouses. Meghan was seen ahead, walking briskly, her blazer stiff and her chin tilted high. Harry followed behind, slower, hands in his pockets, eyes low to the ground. People noticed. Not everyone, but some. An airport worker later recalled that Meghan and Harry didn't speak much as they exited the aircraft. There was a stiffness. No hands held, no casual glances, no whispers shared. This wasn't jet lag. This was tension that had calcified. It moved with them like an invisible fog, unspoken but unmistakably there. The airport terminal, usually indifferent to the presence of celebrities, grew a bit quieter around them. Not because they were being mobbed, but because their silence was louder than any paparazzi flash. Witnesses later reported a hushed disagreement breaking out near gate N13, just past the customs checkpoint, but before the security corridor leading to a VIP car pickup zone. It started, they say, with sharp whispers. Meghan's hands gesturing tightly in front of her. Harry standing still, almost frozen, nodding slightly, expression unreadable. No yelling, no shouting, just a surge of fast, clipped words exchanged in short bursts. "You said we agreed." One person overheard Meghan say. Harry's response wasn't heard, but his head shook slowly. A reaction not of anger, but exasperation. That moment might have passed unnoticed had it not been for what came next. One traveler, who had paused near a vending machine, said she turned toward the couple when she heard what she called a very sharp, firm tone coming from Meghan. She didn't catch every word, but the energy was unmistakably heated. Then it happened. According to 3 witnesses and what would later be described in a preliminary police report, Meghan appeared to shove Harry, not once, but several times. It wasn't violent enough to knock him over, but it was enough to stun him and the bystanders around them. She just kind of pushed him hard, one traveler later told reporters. He didn't react right away. He just looked down and took a step back. Another man described the body language as unmistakably aggressive. Security was alerted, not by Harry, but by a witness who feared the situation could escalate. It was a decision that would unravel everything. Airport security approached the couple cautiously. Meghan's demeanor, according to those present, shifted immediately. She went from intense to composed in a breath. But the witnesses, the cameras, and most importantly, the physical act described in the reports, had already painted a picture that could not be ignored. Harry reportedly told officers that everything was fine, but his voice, as one officer recounted, was distant. Not dismissive, but detached. And it was that detail, combined with the statements of others nearby, that gave security enough reason to detain Meghan on site until local authorities could arrive. As the police arrived, so did the realization this wasn't going away quietly. The news didn't break immediately. At that point, only a handful of travelers and airport staff knew what had happened. Meghan was escorted away through a discreet side exit, away from public view. Harry remained behind, speaking in hushed tones with officers, refusing medical attention, declining legal representation on site. He was not arrested. He was not detained. But he wasn't smiling either. In that moment, Prince Harry didn't look like royalty. He didn't look like the global humanitarian, the Invictus Games founder, or the man who had once stood on the front lines of media wars to defend his wife. He looked tired, hollow even, as though the weight he'd been carrying had finally dropped, and the impact left him dazed. The flight they'd arrived on originated from Los Angeles, but sources claim the couple had spent time in Vancouver days prior. What they were doing there has not been disclosed. Some speculate a private retreat. Others claim it was part of a failed business deal or a silent crisis meeting with Archwell's remaining advisors. But what happened between that boarding gate in Canada and the arrest in Washington is still under speculation. And yet, one thing is now certain. Something irreparable ruptured on that plane, and it exploded just steps from the luggage carousel. Airport authorities handled the situation quietly, but within hours, the story began to leak. A small-time Washington-based crime blog published a cryptic post referencing a high-profile domestic detainment at Seattle-Tacoma, and within minutes, the speculation began. The rumors, the guesses, the theories. But no one got the story right, not at first. Because no one expected that level of exposure. No one thought Meghan Markle, of all people, would be arrested on American soil for a domestic assault charge. Least of all involving Prince Harry, the man who had moved mountains to protect her, renounce his royal duties for her, even split from his own bloodline in the name of love. It was unthinkable. And yet, here it was, unfolding in the most ordinary of places. By the next morning, the story had cracked into mainstream media. The Seattle Police Department, under pressure, confirmed the arrest without releasing Meghan's name. But the damage was done. Paparazzi, news trucks, and online gossip channels descended like a swarm. Everyone wanted answers. Everyone wanted the footage. Everyone wanted to know, had Meghan Markle really assaulted Prince Harry? And why? As authorities prepared to release the incident report to the press, Meghan remained in custody at the South Correctional Entity Facility in Des Moines, Washington. No statements were issued. No spokesperson spoke. Archwell's PR team, known for rapid response, was silent. Not even the Duke and Duchess's ever-loyal fans had words. It was as though a vacuum had formed, sucking in everyone's breath but refusing to exhale any facts. And still, in the court of public opinion, the trial had already begun. Was this a moment of personal collapse? A one-time outburst born of stress and pressure? Or was it a glimpse into something darker, something that had been hidden behind smiles and curated interviews for far too long? The question wasn't just what happened. It was what had been happening. Because no one just snaps at an airport. No one just explodes in a place so public, so controlled, without something boiling underneath for a long time. What had been building inside Meghan? What had been eroding between her and Harry? And what kind of pain, shame, or fury could push someone this far? More than a royal scandal, this was becoming a case study in emotional breakdown. A warning about unchecked power, unresolved trauma, and what happens when public personas collide with private storms. This was the beginning of the unraveling, and the flight from Vancouver to Seattle, which should have been just another short leg in their globe-trotting lives, will now be remembered as the moment everything changed, not just for Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, but for the narrative they built, the world they tried to shape, and the legacy they claimed they were creating. At first, it seemed like just another strained moment between a couple worn thin by life under a microscope. But as the details of the Seattle-Tacoma incident began to surface, the world was left asking the same question. What could have possibly ignited such a heated argument? One so intense that it would lead to Meghan Markle being handcuffed in public and taken into custody. What exchange of words or gestures turned tension into physical contact? What invisible history burst into flames at Gate N13? The answer, it seems, lies not in a single trigger, but in a deep well of resentment, pressure, and unspoken conflict that had been simmering for far longer than the public ever imagined. And like so many storms, it began with a whisper, something so ordinary and personal that it became extraordinary by the sheer scale of who they are. According to several sources close to the couple's staff, and accounts gathered from multiple travelers who were within earshot of the altercation, the disagreement between Meghan and Harry was not loud, but it was sharp, deliberate, like the verbal equivalent of two people fencing behind glass, civil in form, but deadly in intent. It didn't sound like yelling, said one witness, a business traveler seated near the Starbucks kiosk opposite the corridor. But it was intense. Her tone had a snap to it, like someone who's been holding something in for a long time and couldn't anymore. One of the central theories is that the argument began over scheduling. Harry had allegedly wanted to delay or cancel an appearance at a private fundraising dinner in Seattle, a dinner Meghan insisted was essential for maintaining relevance with certain West Coast donors tied to their charitable foundation. Harry, already fatigued from a string of recent appearances and reportedly hesitant to be used as the closer for deals, expressed his desire to pull back. But for Meghan, retreat was not an option. She said something like, "We agreed on this. You can't back out now," recalled a woman who was walking past at the time and didn't recognize the couple until after the story broke. He looked tired. Not annoyed. Not angry. Just exhausted. It wasn't the kind of fight that erupts suddenly. It was the kind of fight that shows its cracks in subtle ways. Through years of mounting decisions made under pressure, through public and private roles that began to blur, through a relationship that had been under siege from both internal and external forces since the moment it began. And if the scheduling disagreement was the spark, then deeper frustrations were the gasoline. Some reports allege that Harry had recently received a call from his brother, Prince William. One that left him visibly shaken. Whether the call was conciliatory or confrontational remains unknown, but it allegedly reopened old wounds. William reportedly urged Harry to take stock of his life, to reconsider how far he had drifted from his original purpose. That call, insiders say, weighed heavily on Harry's mind during the trip, and Meghan, sensing his wavering confidence, became increasingly agitated in the days that followed. "She has always been the driver of the brand," said a former staffer under anonymity. But the more she pushed, the more Harry seemed to retreat. It was like watching someone shrink from their own life. Sources say Meghan felt isolated too, betrayed by the palace, judged by the media, and blamed for every fracture in Harry's relationships. The mounting criticism, dwindling business deals, and constant scrutiny had become more than she could emotionally absorb. And now, here they were in a public terminal, reduced to two figures arguing over plans, priorities, and promises broken. One witness described Harry's posture during the altercation as unmoving, his shoulders slumped, his hands in his coat pockets. Meghan, on the other hand, was reportedly animated, hands gesturing, head tilting with disbelief, voice rising just above a whisper. It was Meghan's intensity, some say, that triggered concern among bystanders. She looked cornered, not by the crowd, but by the conversation, said one man who paused while walking his child to a nearby restroom. It was like watching someone trying to hold on to a script while the story was falling apart. And then came the moment that would change everything. The physical push, a hand on the chest, a second shove, perhaps more, accounts vary. But they all agree on one thing. There was contact. It wasn't a slap, nor a punch. It was a gesture not meant to injure, but to dominate. A message not spoken, but expressed through body language. You could tell it wasn't the first time, one woman said. It didn't feel accidental. It felt practiced. But perhaps what made the altercation so jarring wasn't the action itself. It was the setting. It happened in public, in a place where no one expected to see royalty falter. It was vulnerability on display. The collapse of an image that had been maintained with such meticulous care that even their most intimate moments had become commodified. The police report, while restrained in tone, confirmed that the incident was reported by multiple independent witnesses who felt the situation had crossed a line. It wasn't Harry who called for help. He didn't scream or raise a hand. He stood still. It was the people around them who made the choice. That says something, not just about the incident, but about perception. That even in silence, a story was being told, one that couldn't be spun or ignored. The public's fascination with the couple has always teetered between admiration and skepticism. To some, they are the embodiment of modern resilience. To others, they are performers in a well-produced drama. But in that airport, there was no script. There was no Oprah, no royal protocol, no teleprompter. Only two people, weighed down by years of public and private pressure, erupting into something raw and irreversible. And so, the question remains, was this a one-time outburst, the culmination of a stressful day gone wrong? Or was it a window into something far more enduring and troubling? The truth, as it often is in situations like these, likely lives somewhere in between. But one thing is certain, this wasn't a random breakdown. This wasn't heat-of-the-moment tension between two celebrities in love. This was something deeper. A confrontation between two people who had, over the course of their shared journey, allowed wounds to fester and roles to blur. Meghan wasn't just a wife that day. She was a partner, a brand manager, a public figure, a woman fighting to retain control over a rapidly fracturing narrative. And Harry wasn't just a husband. He was the thread between two worlds, caught between family loyalty and personal liberation. And in that moment, amid the chaos of an ordinary airport, those identities collided. Moments of silence can be more deafening than screams. In the immediate seconds after Meghan Markle allegedly pushed Prince Harry, the terminal corridor fell into an uncanny stillness. It wasn't because of the physical action itself, it was the weight of who it involved. Meghan Markle, Prince Harry, two of the most recognizable faces in the world, locked in a confrontation that neither security detail nor royal protocol could contain. That silence said everything the couple themselves could not. Security footage captured from a nearby surveillance camera reportedly shows the physical contact. The angle isn't perfect, half obscured by a beam, but it's enough to confirm that Meghan's hand made deliberate contact with Harry's chest, and then again with what appears to be a push to his upper arm. There were no fists, no grapples, no falls. But intent, they say, was evident. The tension in her stance, the speed of the motion, and most damning of all, the absence of any visible provocation from Harry. Multiple eyewitnesses filed consistent accounts, noting Meghan's body language as aggressive, overbearing, and in one case, threatening. To some, the act may have seemed mild, even dismissible, something many couples experience in the heat of an argument. But law enforcement officials at the scene didn't see it that way. Not in a public setting. Not when multiple people felt compelled to step in. Not when the alleged victim was unwilling to defend himself. The question isn't whether Meghan's actions were violent in the physical sense. It's whether they crossed the legal threshold of assault under Washington state law. According to the revised Code of Washington, even offensive physical contact that causes fear or distress can be grounds for a misdemeanor domestic violence charge. In this case, The combination of witness statements, security footage, and Meghan's reaction to law enforcement engagement was enough for officers to act. When airport security approached the couple after receiving a third call from a concerned traveler, Harry reportedly stepped between Meghan and the approaching officers. His words were low, his hands up. He was not combative, not defensive, just protective. But by then, the matter was no longer personal. It was procedural. An officer on site later reported that Meghan at first seemed confused, then furious. Not at Harry, but at the growing number of strangers standing around them, smartphones in hand, lips whispering behind cups of coffee. She allegedly asked if the witnesses were allowed to record her and demanded they be asked to delete any footage. She didn't look afraid. She looked insulted, one bystander told a local reporter. Like this was beneath her. Like the fact that she was being questioned at all was the real crime. But beneath that veneer of composure, her voice trembled. She wasn't in control of the room anymore. The rules had shifted. The narrative had broken loose from her hands. When officers asked her to step aside for questioning, Meghan reportedly refused at first, insisting she had done nothing wrong. She reiterated that they were having a private conversation and accused security of overreacting. But her argument was undercut by the growing number of witnesses and the visible discomfort of Harry, who by this point had stopped speaking altogether. He just stood there, said one airport employee, like he wasn't even in the room, like he was somewhere else entirely. That detachment was a red flag for officers trained in de-escalation and domestic incident response. A visibly distressed partner who declines to speak, makes no eye contact, and doesn't contradict allegations often signals a power imbalance, something authorities could not ignore. At 3:27 p.m., Meghan Markle was placed under arrest for misdemeanor domestic assault. She was read her Miranda rights. Officers placed her in handcuffs, standard protocol, and escorted her through a private hallway away from the terminal. No cuffs were placed on Harry. No questions about substance abuse or medical assistance were raised. There were no signs of physical injury. But the moment itself was surreal. Witnesses stood stunned. Many didn't recognize her immediately. Without her polished publicist-curated appearance, no professional lighting, no stylists, no friendly press, Meghan looked like any other woman being led away under suspicion. Her signature calm expression had cracked into something more uncertain, somewhere between disbelief and fury. She looked like she didn't believe it was happening, one bystander later said. Like this wasn't part of her script. The officer who took her into custody would later confirm that Meghan did not resist arrest, but did continue to question the rationale behind it. "This is insane," she allegedly repeated several times. "We're just having a disagreement. This is not domestic violence." But the law, and the cameras, didn't agree. She was placed in the back of a cruiser and transported to the South Correctional Entity, a facility located roughly 20 minutes south of the airport in Des Moines, Washington. The booking process was swift and by the book. Fingerprints, a mugshot, preliminary charge paperwork. No bail was immediately set, pending initial court assessment. Meghan reportedly made no formal statement during booking. Meanwhile, Harry was escorted separately to a secure holding area to provide a voluntary statement. He didn't say much. According to officers, he answered questions when prompted but avoided offering editorial comments. He referred to the incident as a disagreement and said he didn't wish to press charges, but under state law, it was no longer his choice. Domestic violence charges in Washington are prosecutable even without the victim's cooperation if there is sufficient evidence and witness testimony. In this case, the combination of surveillance footage and third-party reports made that threshold easy to reach. As the cruiser pulled away from the terminal, cameras, belated but inevitable, caught the tail end of the scene. One grainy cell phone video, quickly uploaded to social media and shared thousands of times, captured the flash of Meghan's face through the rear window. Just a glimpse, but enough to send shockwaves through the public consciousness. Was this really happening? Was Meghan Markle, former Duchess, activist, mother, being driven away in the back of a police vehicle? Not for a minor dispute, not for a public scuffle with paparazzi, but for allegedly assaulting her husband? And Harry, what of him? He left the terminal later through a back exit, his face shielded by a hoodie and security team. No statements, no visible emotion, just a man who, once again, had become the focal point of a media storm. Only this time, It was his silence that spoke volumes. The moment hands were laid, the story changed forever. What was once a tightly controlled narrative of royal rebellion and post-palace reinvention had become something raw and deeply human. No media training could save it. No brand management could spin it. For the first time in years, the image of Meghan and Harry had escaped their own control, and the world was watching. The air outside Seattle, Tacoma International Airport was damp with Pacific Northwest mist, the kind that clung to your clothes and settled into your bones. But for Meghan Markle, that cool, gray air was nothing compared to the cold realization settling in her chest as the police cruiser turned out of the private lane and onto the wet streets of Des Moines, Washington. Her hands were cuffed behind her back, the stainless steel pressing into her wrists with clinical indifference. She wasn't just a passenger now, she was a detainee, a suspect. And the click of those silver bracelets marked not just an arrest, but the shattering of a royal illusion. Sirens didn't blare. There was no dramatic rush of lights. Everything about the arrest was strangely quiet, efficient, even. Meghan had been escorted out of the terminal through a restricted employee corridor to avoid media attention. Yet the silence only amplified the tension. For someone so used to controlling her narrative, being led away with no camera crew, no makeup artist, no speech ready, was a reality she had never prepared for. Inside the vehicle, the officer in the front seat later described Meghan's demeanor as tense but not combative. She wasn't crying. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't asking for favors. Instead, she kept her eyes forward, lips tight, breathing slow. She asked only one question. "Is Harry okay?" The officer replied, "Yes, ma'am. He stayed behind voluntarily. He's safe." She didn't respond, but she leaned her head back and closed her eyes. Whether in regret or disbelief, no one could say. Back at the terminal, the tension hadn't broken. Prince Harry, now without his wife, remained in a secure area of the airport, away from the growing crowd and the security agents trying to corral passengers who had witnessed the event. Some tried to film, others tried to approach. All were met with firm resistance. One staff member noted that Harry seemed frozen, seated in a plastic chair, hands between his knees, eyes fixed on the tiled floor. A female officer attempted to engage him. She asked if he needed medical attention. He shook his head. She asked if he wanted to file a statement. Again, he declined. When asked if this was the first time such an incident had occurred, he reportedly whispered, "We argue, but it's usually not like this." That line, small as it seemed, became a pivotal part of the written incident report. Not an outright accusation, not a denial either, just a breadcrumb. A clue that this moment may not have been born in isolation, but from a pattern too carefully hidden. As Harry was quietly escorted out through the tarmac gate to a waiting black SUV, Meghan arrived at the South Correctional Entity, known as Score Jail. The facility sits in a relatively inconspicuous location, tucked away between commercial buildings and chain-link fences. From the outside, it looks like any municipal center: gray walls, functional architecture, zero personality. But inside, it is where lives pause, where public images are stripped away and everyone is processed the same, whether a shoplifter or a duchess. Meghan's arrival was handled with protocol. She was led through the intake entrance, where her identity was verified and her belongings cataloged. The items in her handbag, lip balm, sunglasses, a phone that had already been confiscated, were recorded and bagged. Her fingerprints were taken, her photographs snapped. There were no exceptions, no red carpet treatment, no bypassing procedures. She looked like she was still trying to believe it wasn't happening, one intake worker recounted later. But there was no attitude. She didn't fight us. She just looked stunned. The booking photo, though never officially released by the authorities, was later leaked to the press. It showed Meghan with her hair slightly disheveled, no makeup, no jewelry, and eyes locked dead into the camera. It wasn't a look of defiance, nor was it shame. It was the look of someone who had just been hit by a truth too heavy to deny. While Meghan was processed, the world began to buzz. Within an hour of the incident, newsrooms across the country had received anonymous tips. A high-profile woman, a domestic dispute, a surprising arrest. By the time Meghan was placed in a temporary holding cell, headlines had already begun forming, even if names weren't yet attached. Speculation exploded on social media. Who was it? Which couple had been seen flying into Seattle-Tacoma? Which celebrity had allegedly gotten into a fight with her husband in a public place? The guesses ran wild, from reality stars to business magnates to Hollywood elite. But no one could have guessed just how high the story would go. Meanwhile, inside Score, Meghan sat alone. No entourage, no stylists, no palace advisors. Just a narrow bench, a concrete wall, and the unfamiliar sound of her own breathing in a room meant for containment. Back in California, Archwell Foundation staff reportedly went into immediate crisis mode. Phones rang. Emergency meetings were called. Meghan's legal team, long retained for privacy cases and media management, was now activated for criminal defense. For the first time in her public career, this wasn't a matter of image, it was a matter of law. The team's first priority, securing Meghan's release. But without bail being posted or a formal arraignment scheduled, there was little they could do in the immediate hours. Meghan was held under the standard protocol for misdemeanor domestic assault, pending a judge's review of the case and decision on conditional release. Inside the cell, time passed slowly. There was no privacy. Cameras monitored every move. Inmates, few and mostly unaware of her identity, whispered across the corridor. Meghan was placed in isolation, not for safety concerns, but for security. They couldn't risk her interacting with the general population. Her name alone could spark more chaos than any altercation she had just been arrested for. And yet, Meghan wasn't hysterical. According to two staff members who interacted with her during the intake, she appeared calm, controlled. Not happy, certainly, but not panicking either. She kept asking what the next steps were, said one of the guards. Like she was trying to keep everything in order. Like she was already planning her next move. But the control she sought was already gone. Out in the world, the story had gained legs. Journalists dug for confirmation. Royal correspondents, alerted by whispers from within the palace, began piecing it together. And finally, at 6:42 p.m., a regional affiliate published the first credible report. Meghan Markle arrested on suspicion of misdemeanor domestic assault at Seattle-Tacoma Airport. The internet broke in less than 5 minutes. Panic set in. Phones lit up across Montecito. The Sussex's public relations team, caught off guard, issued a brief non-denial. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex are safe. We request privacy at this time. It was a weak response. The media didn't care. The public certainly didn't. By then, the mugshot was circulating, and the damage was irreversible. The arrest had already become a global headline. By midnight, Meghan remained in custody, awaiting an early morning court appearance. Harry had reportedly returned to their hotel under security escort, declining all press inquiries and offering no formal statement. But a source close to him said this. He looked broken. Not embarrassed. Not angry. Just broken. The sirens may not have screamed, but they didn't need to. The world was already hearing the alarm bells. As the heavy door clicked shut behind her, the sound echoed louder than any media storm ever had. Meghan Markle, the woman who once walked down the aisle of St. George's Chapel with the eyes of the world watching, now found herself confined to a narrow, brightly lit holding cell in South Correctional Entity. No red carpet, no cheering crowds, no curated speeches, just a stark, windowless room that reeked of bleach and institutional sterility. For perhaps the first time in her adult life, she was truly alone. No aides, no glam squad, no PR handler whispering next steps, just the raw hum of fluorescent lights and the metal bench beneath her. Every luxury she had once taken for granted, privacy, power, protection, was replaced with surveillance, suspicion, and silence. The intake process had stripped away more than her personal belongings. It had removed the persona, the duchess, the actress, the philanthropist, all of it suspended in time. She wasn't Meghan, the global icon. She was inmate number 486-2192, booked on misdemeanor domestic assault charges. That alone was a sentence, even before any legal proceedings began. As hours dragged by, guards maintained a measured distance. Though respectful, they were clinical, professional, not unfriendly, but certainly not warm. Meghan reportedly asked for her phone. The response was standard. You'll have access to your lawyer at your arraignment. That didn't sit well, but she said nothing more. Inside the holding area, her mind must have raced, though no one could confirm what thoughts occupied her in those endless moments. Was she replaying the airport argument, calculating her next legal steps, wondering how Harry was reacting, or whether he would still defend her once the cameras faded? Was she already scripting the press statement, imagining the carefully worded apology, the controlled damage control? Or was she beginning to feel, perhaps for the first time in years, that her control over the narrative had finally slipped beyond repair? Officers on the night shift, though instructed not to speak on high-profile detainees, later revealed that Meghan remained composed. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. But she also didn't sleep. One officer noted she sat on the bench for hours, leaning forward, elbows on her knees, staring at the floor. She didn't even lie down, the officer recalled. It was like she was waiting for someone to walk in and tell her it was all a mistake. But no one came. There were no calls from Buckingham Palace. No secret royal interventions. No celebrity lawyer bursting through the doors. It was real. It was happening. And she was in it, completely exposed. Back in California, the Archwell team scrambled behind the scenes. They had never prepared for a crisis like this. Legal trouble had always been hypothetical. A tabloid story here, a defamation suit there. But criminal charges? Jail time. This wasn't branding. This was legal war. Meghan's attorney, who had been on retainer for civil disputes, was now facing a different kind of challenge. He immediately filed paperwork for a conditional release hearing and requested a private court session to protect Meghan's public image. But the court, bound by legal transparency, refused special treatment. There would be no closed-door negotiations. Not yet. Not while the charge remained on public record and the witness statements were stacking up. Harry, meanwhile, remained silent. He had been moved to a secure hotel under private protection. Sources close to the couple said he refused to return to their California home until Meghan was released. Not because of anger, but because he didn't know what he would say to her. According to a member of hotel staff, Harry barely spoke during his stay. He requested privacy, declined room service, and spent most of his time in the suite, scrolling through his phone or pacing the room. At one point, a staffer overheard him on the balcony, saying quietly to someone on the phone, "I never thought it would come to this." Meghan, on the other hand, remained in the same cell for nearly 17 hours. Because the assault charge was considered a low-level misdemeanor, and because there was no evidence of physical injury or continued threat, she qualified for early release pending arraignment, but paperwork delays and time-of-day processing extended her stay. In those hours, Meghan experienced what millions of women and men experience during their first brush with the criminal justice system: uncertainty, fear, and the uncomfortable realization that status means nothing behind bars. Her meals were standard issue, plastic trays with bland, barely warm food she didn't touch. When asked if she had dietary restrictions, she simply nodded and pushed the tray aside. At one point, she requested a blanket. It was provided, thin and rough. When she lay down for a brief rest, she didn't sleep. There were no conversations with other detainees. Meghan was held in isolation for security reasons, per department protocol for high-profile arrests. But she wasn't unaware of her surroundings. She listened. She observed. She heard snippets of conversations echoing through the corridor. The buzzing of fluorescent lights. The distant cough of a neighboring cellmate. Every second was sensory overload. A far cry from her candlelit Montecito bedroom and yoga-scented mornings. She asked for a book. None were available at that hour. She asked if she could make a statement. The officer replied flatly, "Not until arraignment." And so, she waited. And outside those walls, the world was spinning. News anchors debated whether this marked the beginning of the end for the couple once hailed as the face of a new royal generation. Social media flooded with hashtags, some mocking, others defending. Public opinion fractured along predictable lines. Meghan's supporters claimed the system was rigged. Her critics declared vindication. But no one had the full story. All they had was the booking photo, the brief police statement, and a million questions. How had it come to this? The woman who once stood before the United Nations, who once told millions of girls to use their voices, was now silent. Not silenced, but silenced by circumstance. Her platform, her power, her media reach, all paused by a single moment in an airport corridor. Was it a moment of weakness? A misstep? Or was it something more dangerous, an unmasking? And if she was unmasked, what did that mean for the man she had once called her rock, her partner, her protector? As the sun rose over Washington, a court clerk stamped Meghan's release order. She would be allowed to leave under conditional supervision, pending her first court appearance. But freedom didn't mean escape. The court of public opinion was still in session, and her journey from inmate to citizen wouldn't erase what the world had seen. By 9 a.m., Meghan was escorted from her holding cell to a private exit. She didn't speak to anyone. She didn't make eye contact. She wore the same clothes she'd been arrested in, creased now, her hair slightly frizzed from the night. But the look in her eyes had changed. There was no shock left, no denial, just the dawning comprehension that the fairy tale had ended. Not with a broken slipper or a closed gate, but with sirens, silver bracelets, and a jail cell no amount of fame could keep her from. Across the Atlantic, dawn had barely broken over London when the first alert buzzed through a secure line in Clarence House. A junior aide, bleary-eyed and still holding her morning tea, froze as she read the headline flashing on her screen. It wasn't speculation. It wasn't a rumor from a dubious tabloid. It was a verified news update from an American law enforcement agency. Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, had been arrested on suspicion of domestic violence against her husband, Prince Harry. Within 20 minutes, the entire upper echelon of the royal household was aware, not by press briefings or morning papers, but through the buzzing chaos of private WhatsApp threads, hastily summoned calls, and security officers whispering behind tightly closed doors. The palace had lived through scandals before, but this was different. This wasn't just a family drama. This was legal, public, and impossible to contain. King Charles, already facing the daily pressures of managing a monarchy under a modern microscope, was briefed just after 7 a.m. A source close to the inner circle claimed that the king was visibly stunned and allegedly asked twice for confirmation. Once assured that the report was accurate, he reportedly sighed deeply and said, "It was only a matter of time." The queen consort, Camilla, is said to have reacted with a mix of exasperation and icy composure. She made no public comment, of course. No one in the palace did. But insiders claim her private words were far more cutting. According to one longtime staffer, she murmured, "She's made her own bed," before returning to her daily briefings. For Prince William, the blow was more personal. Despite the fractured relationship with his younger brother, the ties of blood still ran deep. When he learned of the arrest, he was said to have gone quiet for a long while before muttering to an aide, This can't end well." His wife, Catherine, the Princess of Wales, reportedly showed genuine concern, not for Meghan, but for Harry. "He must be suffering terribly," she reportedly said. "He's always taken it all on himself." And yet, despite private words of empathy, there was no official reaction, no royal statement, no public condemnation, no offers of support. The palace, seasoned in weathering storms, adopted its most powerful weapon, silence. But that silence, far from containing the situation, only deepened public suspicion. What did they know? Had the royal family seen signs of instability in the Sussex marriage before the public did? Had there been warnings, perhaps even discussions about Meghan's behavior, swept under the carpet in the name of family unity or public decorum? Some palace insiders began speaking off the record. One retired royal footman who had served during the Sussex's time at Frogmore Cottage recalled tension even back then. "There were moments," he said, "when you'd hear things. Doors closing sharply. Raised voices. You learn not to linger." Another former palace aide, speaking under condition of anonymity, claimed that Meghan had always felt persecuted by the royal institution, and that Harry was often caught in the middle, torn between his loyalty to his wife and his heritage. He would defend her, the aide recalled, even when it was clear to everyone around that she was spiraling. Even before the couple left the royal fold in 2020, there had been unease. Staff turnover in their office was high. Communication with the press was increasingly combative. There were whispers, mostly kept under wraps, about mood swings, outbursts, and a growing sense of isolation around Meghan. All of it had been dismissed at the time as tabloid cruelty. Now, the pieces painted a darker picture. Behind closed doors at Buckingham Palace, senior advisors held emergency meetings. There were real concerns, not just about reputational damage, but about public perception. Was this the moment that finally tipped the scales? Would the public now see Harry not as a bold truth-teller, but as a man trapped in a toxic relationship? And if so, what would the palace's obligation be? As royal watchers debated on air, royal lawyers reviewed their own protocols. Meghan had relinquished her HRH title when she and Harry stepped down, but she remained a duchess by marriage. No legal mechanism existed to strip her of that title unilaterally, but conversations began, discreetly, about whether the time had come to make a formal request that she relinquish it voluntarily. What complicated matters further was Harry's silence. He had not issued a statement. He had not spoken to his family, not even William. According to one friend close to the royal brothers, William had sent a private message, a simple one. "Let me know if you're safe." Harry did not reply. Inside the walls of Sandringham, Balmoral, and Clarence House, there was no gloating, no triumph in Meghan's fall, but neither was there grief. It was a reckoning, long anticipated, not celebrated, but acknowledged. The institution that she once accused of cruelty now stood vindicated in the court of public opinion. And yet, the royals knew better than anyone that public sentiment is fickle, that today's outrage is tomorrow's footnote. And so, even as the world reeled, the palace waited, watched, calculated. Some younger members of the extended royal family, however, were less restrained. One cousin, never officially quoted but widely believed to be involved in private family circles, was overheard at a private dinner saying, "She finally showed the world what we've all known for years." Royal advisors, meanwhile, were already drafting talking points, not for public release, but for internal use should questions arise. The tone was neutral. Expressions of concern for all parties involved, a reiteration that the Sussexes were no longer working members of the royal family, and a reminder that the palace would not comment on private legal matters. Still, the conversation behind the walls was far from neutral. Some saw this as an opportunity to mend the royal fracture, if not with Meghan, then at least with Harry. "Now that the blinders are off," said one longtime family associate, "maybe he'll find his way back." But others were more cynical. "He's still under her spell," said a former palace staffer. "Don't be surprised if he tries to explain it all away." What made the situation even more complex was that the arrest wasn't just a scandal, it was a signal. To some, it confirmed everything they had feared. To others, it marked the final stage of Meghan's transformation in the public eye, from actress to duchess to advocate to alleged abuser. For years, Meghan and Harry had claimed that the palace never protected them. But now, in the wake of her arrest, it was clear they were on their own. And yet, the silence from Buckingham Palace wasn't heartless. It was strategic. The royals knew that one wrong word, one misstep, could turn the focus back on them. So they remained quiet, even as the press hounded them for comment. They let the storm rage while they stayed behind their stone walls. But walls don't block out whispers. And the halls of Windsor, Kensington, and Clarence House were thick with them. What would happen next? Would Meghan issue an apology? Would Harry stand by her? Would the monarchy finally, officially, cut ties? And what of the children, Archie and Lilibet? The innocent pawns in a story that had become more like a tragedy with each passing chapter. For now, the royal family held its breath. They had lived through crises before, abdications, affairs, even death. But this was something new. This was modern, messy, legal, and perhaps most chilling of all, it was personal. Before the booking photos, before the surveillance footage, before Meghan Markle sat alone in a jail cell with her hair tied back and her dignity slowly unraveling, there was a story that had captured the imagination of millions. It was a love story that seemed too modern, too progressive, too poetic to be real. A divorced biracial American actress and a British prince who defied centuries of royal tradition to be together. They were supposed to rewrite the rules. They were supposed to be the blueprint for a new kind of monarchy. But fairy tales, as it turns out, are rarely built to survive real life. The story of Meghan and Harry began with a blind date in London in the summer of 2016. Friends arranged it. Meghan, then starring in the hit legal drama Suits, was enjoying rising fame. Harry was navigating the increasing pressures of royal life, his military career behind him, but his heart still scarred by the death of his mother, Princess Diana. They met over drinks, and according to both of them, the connection was instant. In the beginning, their romance was refreshingly private. The media didn't catch wind until weeks later. Their early meetings were clandestine, scattered between London, Toronto, and Botswana. The prince flew across continents to spend time with her. She cooked him roast chicken. He introduced her to Africa. They shared long conversations and longer silences, the kind that only exist when two people feel deeply seen. When the press eventually found out, the coverage was brutal. Racist undertones, classist barbs, and invasive curiosity dominated headlines. Harry, who had always loathed the media, issued a rare and fiery statement condemning the press for harassing Meghan. It was the first time he had publicly defended a woman he was dating. It set the tone for everything that would follow. Their engagement came swiftly, barely a year into the relationship. They sat together in a Kensington Palace garden during the official announcement, glowing, laughing, finishing each other's sentences. Meghan spoke of Harry as a kind, warm man. Harry said the stars were aligned. It felt genuine. It felt hopeful. The world wanted to believe. And for a while, they delivered on that promise. Their wedding in May 2018 was one of the most watched events in modern history. St. George's Chapel was filled with gospel choirs, biracial symbolism, and moments of quiet revolution. Meghan walked herself partway down the aisle, then was met by Prince Charles. Oprah was in the audience. The Archbishop of Canterbury spoke of love transcending boundaries. The union seemed to bridge tradition and progress. But behind the lace and the flowers, fractures had alr. Within months, rumors emerged of rifts inside the royal household. Staff members quit in what the press would later call the Sussex Exodus. Whispers of Meghan being difficult became mainstream. Royal watchers noted tension between the brothers, William and Harry, once inseparable. The Duchess of Cambridge and Meghan were reportedly not close, their differences both cultural and personal. In 2019, the couple welcomed their first child, Archie. He was born in Windsor, under a veil of privacy. Unlike traditional royal births, there were no hospital steps, no media appearance hours after delivery. The press chafed at the deviation from protocol. Meghan, reportedly overwhelmed and exhausted, began to withdraw. Later that year, during a royal tour of southern Africa, the couple filmed a documentary that left the world uneasy. Meghan, on camera, admitted she was not okay. Harry confirmed his distance from William. It was the first public sign that all was not well in paradise. Then came the bombshell, January 2020. Meghan and Harry announced they were stepping back from their roles as senior royals. The news sent shockwaves through Buckingham Palace and across the globe. They would split their time between the UK and North America, they said. They would pursue financial independence. They would carve out a progressive new role within the monarchy. The palace was blindsided. Queen Elizabeth, though calm in public, was reportedly deeply hurt. Meetings were held. Agreements were brokered. The couple lost their HRH titles, royal funding, and public duties. They relocated to California, purchased a multi-million-dollar estate in Montecito, and launched Archewell, their philanthropic venture. At first, the new chapter looked promising. A lucrative Netflix deal, a Spotify partnership, virtual summits, book launches, social activism. Meghan penned a children's book. Harry created content on mental health. Their interview with Oprah in 2021 reignited global debate. Meghan alleged racism within the royal family. Harry accused them of emotional neglect. The interview made headlines for weeks. But somewhere along the way, the narrative began to shift. The Netflix series, while watched, was met with criticism for being self-serving. Their Spotify deal collapsed after producing only a few episodes. Staff continued to leave Archewell. A pattern began to emerge. Projects started strong but fizzled. The couple claimed to be misrepresented, misunderstood. But the world, once enchanted, started asking harder questions. Insiders hinted at creative control issues. Meghan reportedly clashed with producers. Harry's friends allegedly felt distanced, no longer welcome in the inner circle. The media began to treat the couple not as victims or revolutionaries, but as celebrities hungry for relevance. And in the middle of it all, their marriage became the silent battleground. Photos from public events showed less intimacy. They stopped holding hands in certain appearances. Harry seemed less animated. Meghan, at times, looked distracted. Rumors of strain began to bubble beneath the surface. Some said Harry felt lost, unsure of who he had become. Others said Meghan was frustrated, tired of always defending herself. Neither confirmed nor denied. The silence was louder than words. And then came the day at Seattle-Tacoma. A single moment in an airport corridor undid years of carefully managed narrative. In that moment, caught on camera, witnessed by strangers, Meghan didn't look like a duchess. She looked like a woman unraveling. Harry didn't look like a prince. He looked like a man exhausted. The shove, the silence, the arrest. It wasn't just a domestic incident. It was a culmination. Because love stories don't fall apart all at once. They erode, moment by moment, conversation by conversation, year by year. The truth is, no one outside their marriage will ever fully understand what they endured together. The media pressure, the family estrangement, the relentless need to prove themselves. But somewhere along the way, the bond that had once seemed unbreakable began to fray. Was it the ambition, the trauma, the isolation? Or was it simply that two people, once perfectly aligned, slowly grew into different versions of themselves? The arrest didn't just make headlines. It forced the world to look again, to revisit the story not as a fairy tale, but as a tragedy, a romance that had captured hearts, but may have cost them their peace. Because the truth is, no matter how glamorous the wedding or how noble the cause, love alone cannot carry the weight of an empire, and this love had carried too much for too long. When a public figure falls, the silence surrounding them often breaks as well. People once sworn to discretion, loyalty, or professional courtesy begin to speak, not always out of malice, but out of a deep-seated urge to set the record straight. In the days following Meghan Markle's arrest, a quiet chorus began to swell. Not loud, not coordinated, but undeniably present. Former staffers, acquaintances, professional collaborators, and even distant Hollywood peers began to offer pieces of a puzzle that, until now, had never quite fit. Some of these voices emerged in private conversations with journalists. Others took to social media under vague pseudonyms or anonymous leaks to British tabloids. A few, braver or more embittered, spoke on the record, using real names and real dates. And though the accounts varied in detail and tone, a common theme emerged. This wasn't the first time Meghan had exhibited troubling behavior. It was simply the first time the world could no longer look away. The first notable comment came from someone who had worked with Meghan during her early acting years, long before the royal title. A costume assistant from the set of Suits described her as relentlessly charming when the camera was on, but noted that behind closed doors, she had a temper. She had two speeds, the assistant said. Sweet as syrup or ice-cold rage. There was very little in between. Another former staffer from her time in the UK recalled the intense pressure in the Sussex household.